Before we get into the video, could everyone please subscribe to my HOA Karen Tales channel? Thank you so much. Karen's smugness was like a thick fog hanging over my yard, suffocating and unbearable. She had taken over my property, dismissed my objections like I was a child whining about bedtime, and now she was sipping wine like a queen overlooking her conquered kingdom. The party was in full swing, with guests completely ignoring my presence. Laughter echoed through my yard, glasses clinked, and my once pristine lawn was getting trampled under designer shoes. The worst part? Karen knew I was angry, and she didn't care. She reveled in it. I watched as she strolled through my yard with an air of superiority, chatting with guests and flashing the occasional fake smile. Every time she made eye contact with me, she gave me that infuriating look, the kind that said, "Poor thing, you don't understand how the world works." I clenched my jaw and forced myself to remain calm. Bursting into a full-blown argument now wouldn't solve anything. I needed to wait, watch, and strike when the moment was right. Karen had turned this into a spectacle. The decorations, the catering, even a makeshift stage they had set up near my patio. This wasn't just a small gathering. It was an event that she had planned meticulously. The thought that she had spent time and effort organizing this on my property without a second thought about my consent made my blood boil. But it also told me something important. She was invested in this. This wasn't just a casual meeting. This was her moment to shine, to show off her so-called leadership in the community. That meant she had something to lose. A group of HOA regulars sat at one of the long tables, chattering loudly about neighborhood affairs. I overheard snippets of conversation. Arguments over fence heights, complaints about someone's car being too old for the neighborhood aesthetic, passive-aggressive remarks about a house that still had Christmas lights up in March. It was all so trivial, so exhausting, and yet these were the people who wielded power over the community. People who had bought into Karen's nonsense. People who believed that dictating how others lived gave them some kind of importance. Near my shed, another group of men stood around. One of them leaning casually against it like he owned the place. One of them, a stocky guy with an expensive-looking watch, was waving a glass of whiskey while telling a loud story about some lawsuit he had won. His voice carried over the yard, blending with the sounds of clinking glasses and background chatter. I had no idea who these people were, but they were treating my backyard like it was a high-end country club. A woman in an oversized hat wandered up my porch steps and peeked inside my house through the window, cupping her hands to block the glare. That was the final straw. I marched over, forcing a tight smile. "Can I help you with something?" She turned, completely unfazed. "Oh, I was just curious. You have such a lovely home." I fought the urge to snap. "Yeah, and I'd appreciate it if you stayed outside." She let out a laugh. I laughed as if I was being ridiculous. "Oh, of course, it's just such a charming space." Before I could say anything else, she strolled away like she had done nothing wrong. My hands balled into fists. These people had no boundaries. They genuinely believed they had the right to be here, that my property was just an extension of their little social club. Karen, of course, was thriving. She had now moved onto the makeshift stage where a small microphone had been set up. She tapped it a few times, grabbing everyone's attention. "Neighbors, friends, first of all, let's give a round of applause to our wonderful host." She gestured in my direction. The guests clapped politely, and I felt my eye twitch. Host? She had the audacity to act like I had welcomed this insanity. I could see the way she was smirking, enjoying every second of my frustration. "As you all know," Karen continued, "community is the foundation of a great neighborhood. That's why it's so important to have spaces where we can come together, share ideas, and build relationships." She gestured grandly around my yard, as if she had personally designed it for this exact purpose. I know that sometimes people struggle to see the bigger picture, but that's what leadership is about, bringing people together even when they don't realize they need it. Her words were a direct jab at me, a smug declaration that she had done something noble, that my resistance was nothing more than childish stubbornness. The crowd murmured in agreement, nodding along like she was some kind of visionary. I could feel the heat rising in my chest, the burning frustration of being dismissed so publicly. Karen wasn't just taking my yard. She was turning this into a public humiliation, a message to the entire neighborhood that she could do whatever she wanted and there was nothing I could do to stop her. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to stay calm. If I lost control now, she would win. That's what she wanted, to push me into a reaction, to make me look like the irrational one. No, I wasn't going to give her that satisfaction. I needed to be smart. I needed to wait for the perfect moment. And then, like an answer from the universe, I spotted it. The sprinkler system. Karen's party was at its peak. Everyone was settled in, drinks in hand, enjoying their expensive catered food. The atmosphere was exactly what she had wanted. Elegant, sophisticated, controlled. She had spent hours, maybe even days, planning this, which meant she had no idea what was about to hit her. I casually pulled out my phone, opening the app that controlled my yard's irrigation system. The sprinklers were programmed for early mornings, but I could manually activate them at any time. I hovered my finger over the button, waiting, watching. Karen was still speaking, basking in the attention, completely unaware that her reign was about to crumble. I wasn't just going to turn on the sprinklers. I was going to unleash them at full blast, hitting every single inch of the yard. The tables, the chairs, the makeshift stage. Nothing would be spared. These people had waltzed onto my property like they owned it, and now they were about to learn a very wet lesson. Karen raised her glass, signaling some grand conclusion to her speech. The crowd lifted their drinks, toasting to her self-importance. I pressed the button. For a moment, there was silence, and then all at once, the sprinklers erupted, sending powerful jets of water shooting into the air. Panic spread through the crowd as streams of water pelted them from every direction. The women in their fancy dresses shrieked, shielding themselves as their perfect hairstyles were drenched. Wine glasses slipped from hands, shattering against the soaked patio. The men in their expensive suits stumbled back, slipping on the suddenly slick grass. And at the center of it all was Karen, frozen in horror, watching as her perfectly orchestrated party fell apart around her. I leaned against my porch railing, sipping my drink as chaos unfolded before me. This was just the beginning. I pulled into my driveway, expecting a quiet afternoon, only to be met with a scene so outrageous that for a moment, I thought I had parked at the wrong house. My front yard, my own personal hard-earned patch of green, was completely taken over by an extravagant garden party. White and gold chairs covered my lawn, draped in satin ribbons. A long table sat in the middle, adorned with fancy tableware, pink floral arrangements, and enough wine bottles to stock a high-end restaurant. Dozens of people, most of whom I had never seen before in my life, were mingling as if this was some high society charity gala. And there, at the center of it all, standing like a self-crowned queen, was Karen, the nightmare of our homeowners association. I barely had time to process the insanity before I noticed something that pushed my blood pressure to dangerous levels. My barbecue grill, my personal brand new stainless steel masterpiece that I'd saved up for months to buy, was wide open, sizzling with steaks. A man in an overpriced polo shirt flipped them like he was at a backyard cookout. I stepped out of my car, dumbfounded, trying to wrap my head around how an event of this scale had taken place in my absence. The audacity of it was mind-blowing. Who in their right mind would just waltz into someone else's yard and throw a full-blown party? The moment Karen saw me, her expression didn't change. No guilt, no embarrassment. Instead, she gave me a condescending little wave, as if I was some unimportant bystander who had accidentally wandered into her grand affair. "Oh, you're home early," she called out, her voice drenched in fake surprise. I stared at her, then at the mess that had overtaken my property. "What the hell is going on here?" I demanded, my voice carrying over the chatter of the guests. Karen let out an exasperated sigh, as if I were the one inconveniencing her. "Oh, don't be so dramatic," she said, waving her hand dismissively. "It's just a small HOA gathering. We needed a nice space, and yours was perfect." I blinked. "Needed a space? So you just took my yard?" She rolled her eyes. "Well, technically, the HOA has certain rights over communal areas, and this is not a communal area. This is my property," I snapped, cutting her off. Karen gave me a pitying look, like I was some clueless fool who didn't understand the world. "Oh, sweetie, I don't expect you to know all the HOA bylaws, but this is for the good of the neighborhood. We're fostering community spirit." She gestured around proudly, as if she had done something noble, as if she had personally been awarded a medal for her service. Meanwhile, her guests carried on unbothered. A group of women in oversized sunglasses giggled over glasses of wine, sitting in my patio chairs. A couple of kids ran through my flower beds, trampling the tulips I'd planted with my own hands. And worst of all, a small group of men whom I didn't recognize were standing next to my shed, my locked shed, talking and laughing like they belonged there. I clenched my fists, trying to keep my temper in check. "Karen, I never gave you permission for this." She sighed dramatically, as if she was growing tired of my complaints. "Oh, don't be so rigid. It's just one afternoon, and honestly, no offense, but your yard was kind of wasted before. This really brings it to life." I took a deep breath. "I want everyone out now." Karen's expression hardened. "That's not how community events work, dear. The party is already in full swing. It would be incredibly rude to kick people out now." I took a step forward. "You think you could just take over my property and tell me what's rude?" Karen's expression barely wavered. "I'm the head of the HOA, and I know the rules. I also know that, technically speaking, you could be fined for disrupting an approved HOA gathering." I laughed, but it wasn't out of amusement. It was the kind of laugh that comes when someone says something so ridiculous, so beyond comprehension, that your brain momentarily short-circuits. "You're threatening to fine me for kicking a bunch of uninvited strangers off my own property?" She tilted her head slightly, a smirk playing on her lips. "I wouldn't say threatening, more like reminding." I took another long look around. My grass was getting stomped down by Karen's guests. My patio furniture was being occupied like it belonged to them. Someone had set up a drink station near my porch, complete with an ice bucket, glassware, and an expensive-looking bottle of champagne. These people had brought a bartender to my house. I turned back to Karen, keeping my voice steady. "Last chance, get everyone out or else." She scoffed. "Oh, please. What are you going to do, call the police? They'll just laugh when they hear it's an HOA event." She wasn't entirely wrong. The police wouldn't exactly rush to break up a group of wine-drinking suburbanites on a sunny afternoon. But that didn't mean I was powerless. If Karen thought she could walk all over me, she was about to learn how wrong she was. I took another deep breath, forcing a smile. "You're right, it would be rude to interrupt a lovely garden party." Karen's smirk widened, mistaking my calmness for surrender. "Finally, you're seeing reason." I turned on my heel and walked inside my house, locking the door behind me. I needed to think. I needed a plan. Karen had overstepped in the worst way possible, and if I let this slide, it would never stop. Next time, it wouldn't just be a party. She'd be dictating what color I could paint my house or trying to charge me fees for non-existent violations. No, this needed to end now. I glanced out the window, watching as Karen sipped from her wine glass, basking in her own arrogance. She really thought she had won, that she could trample over people just because she had a title in a glorified neighborhood club. But what Karen had forgotten, what all bullies forget, is that no one is untouchable. When people push too hard, too far, they eventually learn that they've messed with the wrong person. I glanced at the corner of my yard where my underground sprinkler system was waiting. A slow smile crept across my face. Maybe I couldn't call the police. Maybe I couldn't physically force these people to leave. But what I could do was make staying an absolute nightmare. This wasn't over, not even close. Karen's shriek cut through the chaos like a siren, her hands flailing in a desperate attempt to shield herself from the jets of water shooting in every direction. Guests stumbled away from their seats, their fancy clothes quickly becoming soaked as the powerful sprinklers continued their relentless assault. Plates of food were abandoned. Wine glasses slipped from wet fingers and shattered on the ground. And expensive handbags were clutched tightly as people tried to shield their belongings from the sudden downpour. It was absolute pandemonium. One of Karen's friends, a woman in a pale blue dress that was now completely ruined, screeched as she slipped in the mud. Her designer heels were no match for the soaking wet grass. Another guest, a man in a suit who had been laughing confidently earlier, tried to run toward the patio for cover, only to be taken out by a sudden blast of water that hit him square in the chest. He staggered backward, losing his balance and landing flat on his back with a loud wet splat. I watched from the safety of my dry porch, my arms crossed over my chest, a satisfied smirk on my face as Karen's perfectly planned event unraveled before her eyes. Her precious HOA gathering, the one she had so arrogantly claimed was for the good of the neighborhood, was now a drenched, muddy disaster. And she knew exactly who was responsible. Through the chaos, Karen turned her furious, dripping wet face toward me. Her perfectly styled hair was now a soaked mess, strands clinging to her forehead. Her expensive white blouse was now see-through, exposing the outline of her undergarments, making her look more like a drowned rat than the poised HOA queen she tried to be. The fury in her eyes burned hotter than the midday sun, but the best part was the sheer disbelief. She couldn't process that someone had actually stood up to her. "What did you do?" she screeched, her voice breaking with rage as she stomped through the soaked grass, struggling to maintain her balance. I took a casual sip from my drink, savoring the moment. "Oh, I'm sorry. Did I forget to mention that my sprinklers are on a timer?" I said with mock innocence. Must have slipped my mind. Karen's nostrils flared as she stormed closer, water dripping from her chin. "You did this on purpose," she spat, pointing a trembling, manicured finger at me. I shrugged. "It's my yard, Karen. If I want to water my grass, that's my right, isn't it?" A furious growl escaped her lips, her hands balling into fists. Around us, guests were scrambling to get away, many abandoning their belongings in their frantic attempts to escape the downpour. A woman let out a horrified gasp as she realized her expensive purse had been left directly in the path of one of the more powerful jets, now completely soaked. Another man tried to retrieve his phone, which had slipped from his pocket and landed in a growing puddle of muddy water. The entire scene was a masterpiece of poetic justice. One by one, Karen's guests turned on her. "This is ridiculous, Karen," a woman in a ruined silk dress snapped as she wrung out her dripping sleeves. "You said this was a secured event." "Yeah. Did you even ask for permission?" Another guest chimed in, shaking his head as he glared at her. "This is an embarrassment," an older man muttered, wiping water from his face as he stomped toward the exit. Karen's face twitched as she realized her so-called supporters were abandoning her. She turned back to me, her fury bubbling over. "You're going to regret this," she hissed. "I swear, you're going to pay for this." I tilted my head, feigning curiosity. "Oh, and how exactly do you plan to do that, Karen? Fine me? I'd love to see the HOA bylaw that says I can't use my own sprinklers in my own yard." She was seething now, her entire body shaking with frustration. She had expected me to roll over, to accept her nonsense like so many others had. But now, standing there drenched and humiliated in front of her entire social circle, she realized she had miscalculated. With nothing left to say, Karen let out a frustrated scream and turned on her heel, stomping toward the exit. But her soaked heels had other plans. Just as she took her first dramatic step, her foot slipped in the wet grass, sending her toppling backward. The crowd collectively gasped as she landed flat on her back with a loud wet splat, mud splashing up onto her already ruined outfit. Silence hung in the air for a brief second, and then someone snorted. Another person let out a stifled laugh, and before I knew it, full-blown laughter erupted through what was left of the party. Karen, the all-powerful HOA tyrant, the self-proclaimed queen of the neighborhood, was sprawled out in the mud, soaking wet and utterly defeated. She scrambled to get up, her hands flailing in the slippery grass. Struggle only made the laughter grow louder. Finally, she managed to get to her feet, her face burning red with fury and humiliation. Without another word, she stormed toward the street, her soaked shoes squelching with every angry step. The rest of the guests, realizing the show was over, quickly gathered their things, those that weren't completely ruined, and hurried after her. The once bustling party had dissolved into a chaotic retreat, guests abandoning the mess they had created in their desperation to escape. Plates of half-eaten food sat abandoned on my patio table. The rented decorations, once pristine, were now a soggy, tangled disaster. My lawn was a war zone of muddy footprints and tipped-over chairs. But I didn't care. It was worth it. As the last of the guests disappeared down the street, leaving only the wreckage of Karen's failed event behind, I let out a slow, satisfied breath. I had won. Karen had always prided herself on being untouchable, on being the one in control. But today, she had learned a valuable lesson. She wasn't as powerful as she thought. More importantly, she had finally been held accountable for her arrogance. I stepped off my porch and surveyed the aftermath. It was going to take some effort to clean up the mess, but in the grand scheme of things, it was a small price to pay. I had made my point. I had stood my ground, and best of all, I had done it without breaking a single rule. As I reached down to pick up a discarded napkin, I spotted something on my lawn, a single abandoned name tag that had likely been part of Karen's event. I picked it up and read the bold print, HOA President. I let out a small chuckle before tossing it into the nearest trash bin. It seemed fitting after all. By the time I was done, Karen wouldn't be holding that title for much longer. This wasn't just the end of her party. This was the beginning of the end of her reign. Karen's departure was anything but graceful. She stomped down the street, leaving a trail of muddy footprints behind her, her wet clothes clinging to her like a second skin. Her once pristine white blouse was now a strewn mess of grass stains and dirt, her hair a tangled disaster. The few remaining guests, now more embarrassed than outraged, hurried after her, some muttering under their breath, others shaking their heads in disbelief at how badly the day had gone. I leaned against my porch railing, watching as they disappeared, my heart still pounding from the sheer satisfaction of it all. Karen had expected me to be another pushover, just another resident too scared to challenge her authority. She had counted on my silence, my compliance. Instead, I had given her something she never saw coming: consequences. The sprinklers were still running, sending jets of water into the now empty yard, pooling into the trenches left behind by the frantic footsteps of Karen's guests. My lawn was a wreck, chairs overturned, discarded napkins plastered against the wet pavement, half-eaten plates of food left to soak in the growing puddle. The remains of Karen's elaborate floral decorations were scattered, their carefully arranged petals now floating in the muddy mess like tiny ships lost at sea. It was chaos, but it was my chaos, and every single bit of it was worth it. I let out a breath, allowing the moment to sink in before finally reaching for my phone and turning off the sprinklers. The water slowed to a halt, leaving behind a soggy battlefield. The silence that followed was almost surreal. A few birds chirped from the trees, seemingly unfazed by the insanity that had just unfolded. Somewhere down the street, a car door slammed, followed by the muffled sound of an angry Karen barking orders at someone, likely one of her unfortunate followers. I shook my head, stepping down from the porch, surveying the damage with a satisfied smirk. It would take some effort to get my yard back to its original condition, but in that moment I didn't care. The sight of Karen's dripping, humiliated face would replay in my mind for weeks, if not years. I could already imagine the way the gossip would spread through the neighborhood, how her perfect image as the all-powerful HOA leader had been shattered in a single afternoon. As I picked up a soaked paper plate from the grass, I heard footsteps approaching from the sidewalk. I turned to see my next-door neighbor Mark standing just outside the fence, a huge grin on his face. "Dude," he said, shaking his head, "that was the most satisfying thing I have ever seen in my life." I chuckled, tossing the ruined plate into the nearest trash bag. I figured it was time someone put her in her place. Mark stepped closer, glancing around at the disaster left behind. "Man, you have no idea how many people have been waiting for this day. Karen has been running this HOA like a dictatorship for years. The way you handled her, that was legendary." I shrugged. She gave me no choice. You don't just hijack someone's yard and expect to walk away without consequences. Mark laughed, crossing his arms. "You know, word's already spreading. People are talking about what happened, and from what I'm hearing, they are not exactly on Karen's side." That caught my attention. I wiped my hands on my jeans, turning fully to face him. "What do you mean?" Mark leaned in slightly, his voice lowering as if he were sharing a well-kept secret. Karen's been on thin ice with a lot of homeowners. People are sick of her power trips, but no one's had the guts to challenge her until now. What you did today, that was the final nail in the coffin. People are already talking about calling for a vote to get her removed as HOA president. I raised an eyebrow. I hadn't expected that. Sure, I wanted to humiliate Karen to make her regret ever messing with me. But the idea that I might have started a movement against her, that was an entirely different level of victory. She's not going to go down without a fight, I said, more to myself than to Mark. Mark smirked. Maybe, but after today, she's lost her biggest weapon, fear. People aren't scared of her anymore. They've seen her humiliated, and now they know she's not as untouchable as she pretends to be. I nodded, processing his words. The thought of Karen losing her position, her authority crumbling beneath her, was almost too good to be true. But deep down, I knew he was right. Her power had never come from actual rules or authority. It had come from intimidation, from making people believe she was in control. And now that illusion was gone, before Mark could say anything else, another voice called out from across the street. Hey! I looked up to see an older woman, Mrs. Henderson, standing on her porch with a delighted smile. That was the best entertainment I've had in years. Let me know if you ever need help running for HOA president. I'd vote for you in a heartbeat. I laughed, shaking my head. I think I'll pass on that, but thanks. She winked. Just let me know when the next Karen Sprinkler show is happening. I'll bring popcorn. More neighbors passed by, some waving, others giving me approving nods as they walked their dogs or watered their plants. It was strange seeing how quickly the tide had shifted. Just hours ago, Karen had stood in my yard, basking in her own self-importance. Now, she was the one being whispered about, the one being laughed at. I finished cleaning up what I could and headed back inside, finally letting myself relax. The adrenaline was wearing off, replaced by a deep sense of satisfaction. Karen would no doubt try to retaliate, but it didn't matter. She had already lost. Later that evening, as I sat on my couch scrolling through my phone, a notification popped up in the neighborhood group chat. I clicked on it, my eyes widening as I read the latest messages. Karen was already in damage control mode, trying to spin the disaster as an unfortunate accident and painting herself as the victim of an unexpected equipment failure in my yard. But it wasn't working. The comments were ruthless. Maybe next time ask before you throw a party in someone else's yard. Karma is a beautiful thing. I think we should start discussing a new HOA president. Just saying. The more I scrolled, the more it became clear Karen's grip on the neighborhood was slipping. And for the first time in a long time, people weren't afraid to say it. I leaned back, a satisfied smile tugging at my lips. This wasn't just a victory. This was the beginning of something much bigger. Karen had spent years making people feel powerless, forcing her rules and demands on everyone without consequence. But today, she had finally faced one, and something told me she wasn't going to be the HOA president for much longer. The aftermath of Karen's disastrous garden party spread through the neighborhood like wildfire. By the next morning, I couldn't even step outside without catching bits and pieces of conversations about what had happened. The HOA queen had been dethroned, at least in the eyes of the people. I walked out onto my porch, stretching as the cool morning air hit my skin. A few neighbors were already out and about, walking their dogs, others tending to their lawns. Every single one of them had something to say. A passing jogger gave me a thumbs up as he ran by. Another neighbor, a man I had only spoken to in passing before, raised his coffee mug in a silent salute. You really did it, Mark said, stepping up from his yard next door, a smirk on his face. Karen's still trying to spin the whole thing as some malfunction of your property, but nobody's buying it. I chuckled, shaking my head. She actually thinks people are dumb enough to believe that. She's desperate, Mark said, leaning against the fence. She's scrambling to hold on to what little control she has left, but it's slipping through her fingers. It was almost sad, almost, but not quite. I looked out at my yard, which was still in recovery from the chaos. Some of the grass was flattened, the once perfectly trimmed edges now uneven, and a few pieces of Karen's abandoned decorations still clung to my bushes. But all of that could be fixed. The damage to Karen's reputation? That was permanent. Later that afternoon, I checked my phone and saw another update in the neighborhood group chat. The topic was clear as day: HOA president vote. Time for a change. I opened the thread, scanning the comments. The response was overwhelmingly in favor of removing Karen from her position. Been waiting years for this moment. She's abused her power for too long. It's time we take back control. I say we call an official vote. Who's with me? The messages piled in one after another. The consensus was obvious. Karen's time was up. As if on cue, my doorbell rang. I already had a feeling who it was before I even reached for the handle. I pulled the door open, and there she was, Karen, standing on my porch, her arms crossed, her expression a tight mask of forced calm. But beneath it, I could see the barely contained rage. "We need to talk," she said, her voice clipped. I leaned against the doorframe, folding my arms. "Oh, about what? How you trespassed on my property, threw a party without my permission, and then got humiliated in front of the entire neighborhood." Karen's jaw tightened. "You think you're funny, don't you?" "A little," I admitted with a smirk. She exhaled sharply, gripping her purse like she was trying to crush it. "Look, I'm willing to put all of this behind us. You had your fun, you made your little point, but things are getting out of control. There are people talking about removing me as HOA president. That's not good for anyone." I raised an eyebrow. "Not good for who?" "For the community," she snapped, but her voice wavered. "We need strong leadership. Without me, this neighborhood will fall into chaos." I laughed. "You mean people might actually get to make decisions without you dictating everything?" Her nostrils flared. "You don't understand how much work goes into running an HOA. It's not just about enforcing rules. It's about maintaining property values, keeping the neighborhood in order." I sighed. "Karen, I think you're missing the point. People don't want you in charge anymore. They're tired of the way you run things. This isn't just about me. It's about everyone." She took a step forward, lowering her voice. "I know you have influence now. People are listening to you. If you tell them to back off, they will." I shook my head. "Not happening." Karen's face twisted in frustration. "I should have had you fined for what you did yesterday. I should have made sure you paid for ruining my event." I smirked. "And yet here you are asking for my help for the first time since I had known her." Karen looked genuinely rattled. The confidence she always carried was gone, replaced with uncertainty. She had never been in this position before, never had to beg for support, and the fact that I was the one standing in her way was clearly driving her insane. She let out a slow breath, forcing a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Fine, have it your way, but don't think for a second that this is over." I tilted my head. "Oh, I know it's not over. The HOA still has to vote after all." Her eyes darkened, and for a moment, I thought she was going to snap. But instead, she turned sharply on her heel and marched off my porch, her heels clicking angrily against the pavement as she disappeared down the street. I pulled out my phone and opened the group chat again. More messages had come in. "We need an official meeting. Let's make it happen. Karen needs to go. Enough is enough." I smiled, typing a simple response. "Let's set a date." The next week, the neighborhood gathered for the meeting. Karen showed up, of course, still trying to salvage what little power she had left. She made her usual speeches, trying to convince people that removing her would be a mistake. But the damage had been done. People had seen her for who she really was, and no amount of fast-talking could erase that. When the vote finally happened, it wasn't even close. Karen was out. As the results were announced, she sat there in stunned silence, her face pale. It was the first time I'd ever seen her speechless. But as reality set in, her expression hardened. She stood abruptly, muttering something under her breath before storming out of the meeting, slamming the door behind her. A quiet murmur spread through the room, followed by relieved laughter. People shook hands, clapped each other on the back. The weight of years of frustration had finally been lifted. Mark nudged me with his elbow. "Well, look at that. The neighborhood's finally free." I chuckled. Took long enough. Over the next few days, things felt different, lighter. The neighborhood seemed more relaxed, more alive. People were talking, joking, making plans to fix things that had been ignored for too long. Without Karen's iron grip, it was like the place had breathed its first real breath in years. One evening, as I sat on my porch watching the sunset, My phone buzzed with another message. New HOA elections coming up. You should run. I shook my head with a chuckle. No way. I had won my battle. That was enough. As I took a sip of my drink, a familiar figure walked past my house. Karen. Her pace was brisk. She didn't look in my direction. She didn't acknowledge me at all. For the first time, she was just another neighbor, not a queen, not a ruler, just another person walking down the street. And that was the sweetest victory of